Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here once again, back with another Elder Scrolls Online Let's Talk segment. Today we will be comparing Magicka sets for the Magicka Nightblade. In this video we're going to be covering a lot of the most popular ones. We're going to look at a few not so popular ones, see if they're any good, and then try and talk about how they might work on others. We'll look at pros and cons. For every class, however, again, we will be focusing on the Nightblade. In the next video, we'll be looking at Dragonite, and then I'll also be doing written write-ups for the Sorc and Templar. I might do videos on them. Not 100% sure about that just yet. But as always, I want to give a massive shout-out to the people who just help enable me, support me financially so that I can work on making content creation and improving the means in which I deliver it. Recently, I've been able to meet my goal on Patreon, and I've upgraded my studio. I have a green screen, proper lighting. I've spent a lot of time going through software to help make recording better and all that stuff. So really, really thank you. Especially Bilal, who just joined to become a True Nord. Massive shout out to you, as well as Random User, who has been giving me tons of in-game materials, and just he actually made the Magicka Nightblade comparison video possible because I got all of the gear pretty much from him and a few other guildmates and then some friends of mine. So really, really thank you, everyone. But let us begin the comparison video. Hope you enjoy. The time has finally come where we are going to investigate all of the Magicka build's options in terms of gear sets. Well, not all of them, but all of the most popular ones, and a few maybe hidden OP ones. I'm going to be splitting this up into classes, and the first is going to be my best class, which is the Magicka Nightblade. I'll also be doing one with Magicka Dragonite, as I'm very strong with the rotation. I understand the class quite well, and then I'll also be doing possibly video write-up or video formats of the Templar. I did main a Templar for two major patches, did crazy good DPS on them, but they've kind of fallen under the rug, sadly, due to over-excessive nerfs and not really fitting in with the sustained meta of Morrowind. And then also possibly Sorc, although I have the least amount of experience with the Magicka Sorc. Stam Sorc is fine, but Magicka Sorc, I never really got into it because my guild has so many of them that it was like, why would I ever play this? I have one, it's max level, I've tinkered with it, but I haven't given it the time and dedication that others. So, might not make a video on the Sorc or Templar just because of how I fit in with them right now. I'm not really happy with playing them, but I will do a written write-up at the very least, so if I don't make a video of it, I will write up on either the official forums or Deltia's website and some format, maybe both, to get the information out of like what sources should we be using or what sets should we be using. And some of the guys I've already written, I've already tested on paper what wins for them and kind of putting them into Deltia's guide. So like the Magicka Sorc have been adjusted a little bit so that that information is up to date and the most powerful sets are there. Now we're just going to prove it. So I already know sort of what's doing what sort of thing. I'm just going to show you firsthand, like, hey, this is actually what happens when you look at a real test environment instead of saying, hey, look I did a 1 million damage parse on the dummy with no add-ons and this one won, because that doesn't prove anything. There's too many corrupting variables, there's possibilities that you're not looking at. So with this, I'm going to try and keep things as controlled as possible and just changing through the gear sets and going through such a long parse that those corrupting variables start to condense and become much more stabilized in terms of like, hey, this has a 10% proc chance, it procs at 10%, instead of like some parses where it's like, oh, if I get really, really lucky RNG, it'll look like I had an 80% proc chance out of a 10% because I was just so damn lucky. So, again, we'll be using the Lambent Target Centurion just so I get that really fat, long parse so those variables condense. If I have variability in crit chance, that kind of gets more in line. Proc rates, anything of the sort we'll be investigating. And with the Magicka Nightblade in particular, we're going to look at the sets that I'm going to do. So the first one will be Twiceborn Star. really classic, crafted set. Was best in slot for quite a while before the changes to aggressive Warhorn and how Major Force worked. Now it's kind of fallen under the power of things because it's not there aren't any multiplicative bonuses of crit hit damage, so gaining the Shadow Stone on a caster build is not nearly as strong as it used to be. Still, Shadow is still a very powerful Mundus Stone. This set gives a lot of health, it gives stamina, it gives Magicka, it gives us a lot of great stats that might not boast the best DPS, but boast a really hearty mix of damage and survivability, especially in places like Halls of Fabrication where you have to dodge and you're just taking so much damage, so being tankier is really, really nice. So we'll be looking at that. Again, I'm using the Thief and Shadow with that. We'll talk about more when I get to that. Then we are going to look at the classic Juliano slet. Like, you can't go wrong with Julie on any class you're playing because it works really well. It's got crit, it's got Magicka, it's got spell damage. It's phenomenal, and it's BOE crafted. So, hooray, hooray. We'll be investigating that with the Thief Mundus Stone. That's what I'll be using with all of the things. Then after that, we will look at Scathing Mage, the best in slot suggested in most situations. And then we'll talk about, again, pros and cons, because Scathing Mage might always be best in some situations, and we'll talk about that as we go through the video. Next is a set that never really got super popular, aside from Sorks and Maelstrom Arena once upon a time with Overload builds. Now that's kind of changed, but the set has also changed, and what this does is it increases your light and heavy attack damage by 20%. We're going to see and look at the set, hey, are we really missing out on something? Is everyone snoozing on this set in terms of, hey, a lot of people do heavy attacks now, is it better now in fitting into Morrowind's sustain changes of, like, everyone's doing heavy attack builds? So we'll be looking at Elegant because of the just changes in importance. Light attacks got a massive damage buff. Heavy attacks got nerfed in terms of damage, but we're doing them much more frequently. So with light and heavy attack builds being more potent than they used to be, maybe this set is more potent than we once thought. So we'll be investigating that, see where it lies. The other really nice thing is that it fits into really simple builds, so people who can't do complex rotations because they're either older or they have, like, rheumatoid arthritis or something that makes playing the game harder, because there are people like that, then we'll investigate, hey, is this a good option for you if you're not comfortable with a rotation or you're actually limited in doing a rotation. And then the final one we'll be looking at is War Maidens, a set that I absolutely despise from a PvE perspective and get tons and tons of questions about it. I'm finally going to lay them to rest of why isn't War Maidens good? Constantly asked. It's like, look at all that spell damage, and we're going to look why that's the case. But let's explain parameters. So the things that I'll be keeping consistent, I'll be using all gold gear, all Magicka enchanted, all legendary divines. And then I'll be using 2-piece Grothdar with all of them. I'll be using 3-piece Moondancer on jewelry, and then a 4-piece active on our back bar with a sharpened Berserk. And then on our front bar will be a sharpened Maelstrom Inferno. So going to be doing fire, so there is no variability in terms of lightning attacks or anything like that. However, I will talk about some of the sets that play more into that or might fall out of that because lightning staves are very strong. They have uses, especially in AoE, but since I'm doing single target, that's what I'm just going to do doubled Inferno because that's what I prefer. That's what I like best. And then CP is going to be identical. We are running 44 Elfborn, 43 Elemental Expert, 31 Erosion, 26 Staff Expert, 48 Master at Arms, and 18 Thaumaturge. Now, this isn't mathematically perfect yet. I've just been tinkering around. A lot of people have been saying, oh, just put points into Spell Erosion instead of running Breach or Infused Crusher enchants, and I really disagree with that idea, but I was like, hey, this is still something that's worth investigating. So, since I have that, I'm just going to keep that there, especially since we're not changing any sets that have, like, more or less penetration, everything's static. The only thing that's going to change really is the importance of critical hit damage with Magicka abilities in the form of Elfborn, because some sets will have higher crit and some will have lower. But we're going to keep that a static variable to say, hey, this is something that interacts with our CP, and that's why it might be more powerful than others. As for abilities, same thing as we did before with the Maelstrom rotation. Blockade, Funnel Health, Crippling Grasp, Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, Soul Harvest, Impale, Harness Magic. Ooh, not Harness Magicka. We will be using Elemental Drain so we can actually sustain and get Major Breach. Twisting Path, Siphoning Attacks, Inner Light, and then we'll also be using Shooting Star. That way we keep things consistent. And again, I'm not going to be trying to do a really min-max rotation. I'm not going to be doing things as best as possible. I'm going to be doing things in a static order so that I have consistency instead of inconsistencies where it's I have less chance to make mistakes. So by following a set pattern, I'm less likely to be like, oh, hey, I missed a weave here, or I missed a buff uptime because I did something incorrectly. So by having a easier, simpler rotation, it will have less overall DPS, but it will still give us enough to see disparities in some of these sets. Okay, so we went through that, again, using spell power potions as per usual, just so we get permanent major sorcery, get that Magicka return, and then we'll be using blue food. So our sustain isn't going to be insane, but it's going to be investigating that. I mean, we'll just have enough health. This is what I would normally run in a dungeon, so that we're at a healthy amount of health. Imagine that. Okay, and then again, our Thief Mundstone is going to be consistent across all tests, and then for Twiceborn Star, we will be using the Shadow Mundstone. I guess that covers pretty much everything. So, yeah, I guess let us begin. Coming in first, we have Twiceborn Star, a crafted set that requires 9 traits. As for pros with this set, again, crafted set means it's BOE. You can have a buddy make it for you or someone else in a guild. It has very versatile stats as it has 2 through 4 pieces of health, stamina, Magicka, meaning it'll help you survive, block, dodge, whatever, and DPS, and then you get that second Fat Mundstone, which you're going to be using Thief and Shadow together for the most DPS. It's extremely beginner-friendly because it's so versatile in terms of stats, defenses, and offensive power, and then it's very close to other BOE sets in terms of DPS potential, so it's a really good setup for people looking to have a little bit more defensive power, maybe more beginner-esque or whatever. As for cons, it's a 9-trait set, so it requires every single trait to be known to craft that single piece that you want, so not everyone has that. However, there are the new scrolls that speed that up. The set doesn't boast insane DPS anymore because of the change to Major Force not being multiplicative. It's additive now, so it's not as crazy. And it enables operational DPS because you have to crit in order for Shadow to gain a DPS effect. So if you're doing burst parses and you're not able to crit all the time, you might not get that extra damage out of it. So it's not a totally applicable thing. But we're going to look at the DPS, and I pulled just over 31k, pretty standard for a set. It's not going to, again, boast anything crazy. It's going to be the weakest one that we test in this application, but it doesn't mean that it's bad, because you get all of that extra health and stamina, so if you're doing a hard trial like Halls of Fabrication, it's going to be really, really great for that. Just looking through buffs, you can kind of pause the video and take a glance if you would like. The next set we are investigating is Julianos, a very tried and true, easy to craft, get a hold of set that a lot of people use because it's just so damn versatile. So in terms of pros, again, craftable set means you can buy it from a guildie, you can have one make it using mats, whatever. It's customizable, all that great stuff. It has very versatile stats in terms of the 5-piece applies to healing and damage because it's spell damage, so you don't have to worry about losing out on solo potential. It's really good for that sort of stuff. It's also going to pair really well with high critical hit damage builds, especially Nightblades and Templars, because they have that built-in 10% crit hit damage modifier because this has 2 crit bonuses. And again, the 5-piece is always going to be in effect, aside from maybe damage shields, because we have a spell damage coefficient which applies to all abilities, healing or damage. As for cons, it's going to have a relatively low DPS ceiling. It's not going to boast anything nuts. It's going to come out ahead of Twiceborn Star for the Magicka Nightblade and Templar, as well as all of the other classes. For the most part, you might see a little bit of times when TBS beats Julie on some of the other classes, but we'll talk about that in their videos. But that's because some of the other classes don't have those crit hit damage modifiers like the Sword DK and Warden, so it's going to be a little bit weaker in terms of overall DPS, because that spell crit won't be as powerful when it procs. But in terms of DPS, we look at the parse, and I get 31,479, just about 110 DPS more than TBS. We can look through the buff times, see the variability in that if we really want, but nothing really out of the blue with this set. Pretty standard for a DPS set that you can get a hold of, similarly to Hunting's Rage for a stamina build. Next is Scathing Mage, one of the most powerful sets for the Magicka Nightblade in many situations. As for pros, this set has a disgustingly high spell damage potential, especially for Nightblades and Templars, because so many of our abilities proc it. Twisting Path, even though it seems like a dot, is considered direct damage to the game, so that's going to proc Scathing Mage like nuts. That's what it means by synergizes extremely well with the Nightblade kit. We have tons of ways to proc it. It's very, very powerful. We're going to see easily over a 60% uptime, and it only needs roughly a 58% uptime in order to beat Julianos. And because of that, it's going to have the highest DPS potential, as I mentioned, because it's just going to have such a high uptime in real fights, single target and AoE, that it's going to blow other sets out of the water. As for cons, farming dungeons sucks. This is known by pretty much everyone. Getting the perfect gear pieces in the perfect traits is awful. ESO is really notorious for having shitty hamster wheel grinds. The other thing is that this is going to be better on some classes. Pretty much you're only going to use it on a Templar or Nightblade. You're not going to use it on anything else because they don't proc it as much. And then this set has a low uptime on high mobility fights, especially in Halls of Fabrication where there's so much moving around that its uptime is going to be severely diminished, kind of bringing it out of power. But now we'll look at the parse, and it comes in at a whopping 32,772. This just really blows the other sets out of the water. We're going to see something a little bit closer, which kind of goes against what I said earlier about I hate the set. It's War Maiden, but it still beats War Maiden, and we're going to talk about why that happens with that when we get there. But here are the buff up times. Here's the damage contribution. You can peruse through this, see if you can figure out why the set is so damn powerful. But now we're going to move on to the next set, which is Elegance. Elegance was a set that a lot of people have snoozed on for quite a while because it has fallen out of favor. It was used once with Sorks for the Overload meta in Maelstrom Arena to burn through stuff, but it's not used too much anymore. However, Morrowind has changed the importance of light and heavy attacks, improving their damage and their speed, and sustain is required, so a lot of people do that now. So in terms of pros, that's what I mean with it works well with the Morrowind meta. That damage and that sustain is very important to us, so having a set that enforces that idea is really great. It's a BOE set, and it's easy to farm. For a overland set, you can buy pieces, whatever, and then it works really, really well with easy-to-use builds. They're efficient, they do high damage, and you press left click or you hold left click. It's really easy to do, so it's accessible to a lot of people. As for cons, it can be expensive to buy, especially once people start figuring out how damn strong this set is in Morrowind. And again, it's going to be better on some classes. Like Templars and Wardens don't have a lot of modifications to light and heavy attacks, so it's not going to be that great. And then it's going to limit your rotation diversity because you're going to be doing so many heavy attacks to get that benefit out of it that you're not going to be able to do like a normal rotation as easily, or if you were, you'd be better off with a different set. But I have the damage parse here already, and we pull 31,899, just under 32k. All the buff times are there. Again, you can look through them, see we probably could have get a little bit higher if I had better uptimes, but this set is really, really strong, and it's going to be even stronger with a lightning heavy attack build, so keep that in mind that this isn't fully representative of the crazy power that it has. And then last, we have War Maidens, one of my least favorite sets because it works by buffing a single damage category. I really dislike these sets because they don't apply to everything. They're not very versatile. But in terms of pros, it boasts the highest single target for a BOE set on a target dummy. That doesn't mean it's going to boast the highest in a raid because of other reasons. Extremely powerful in a lot of PvP builds, especially Nightblade and Templar, because most of their damage is magic in PvP, so that's really great for that. It has a great balanced 2 through 4 piece, gives us all of our stats that we need, and then it's a BOE easy to farm set. Cons, 5 piece doesn't apply to healing, so you're going to be offensive, not defensive. It's not going to apply to all damage types, leaving it extremely weak in AoE situations where a lot of our damage comes from fire, lightning, and so on. So that means awful AoE potential. It's also extremely expensive if you're going to try and buy it, and it's going to be absolutely garbage on classes like the Dragonite and Sork, who are primarily fire or lightning damage. So keep that in mind, that while it might look nice on this Nightblade or a Templar, it's not going to be good on anything else, and that the reasons why it looked good are not representative of endgame. But if we look at the parse, which I already have, we'll see it in just a second, I pull 32,084 DPS. But if we look at the damage, my light attacks went down 2%, and my twisting, all of my magic damage went up by 1% in terms of what it contributes to, while all of my elemental damage went down 1 to 2%. And in an AoE situation where I have more enemies sitting in elemental damage, because ultimates and wall of fire or lightning heavy attacks, War Maiden is really going to become weak. But now let's talk more about that. So that concludes all of the testing. There was some interesting things that we discovered, mainly with War Maiden. Now, we talked a little bit about it in the breakdown during the parse, but I want to talk more about why War Maiden looks so good in this parse, and it's because it's pure single target, and it's on the Nightblade, which has the most magic damage in the game. So War Maiden's not going to be good on like a Sork because they don't have too much magic damage other than crystal frags and mines. On a Templar, it might look really nice as well because they have shards, they have jabs. But the issue is that we look, even though it has really great magic damage, so like our Twisting Path went up 1%, our Assassin's Will went up 1%, our Crippling Grasp went up 1%. Like, all of our magic damage really shot up in terms of power. Like, if we look here, Twisting Path and Assassin's Will are 2 and 3, but Blockade of Fire is 4, versus Blockade of Fire always being second place. So that looks really good on single target because Assassin's Will is pure single target. Crippling Grasp is pure single target. Funnel Health, single target. Impale, single target. So all of these magic damage things that are single target look really strong. But the issue is in Elder Scrolls Online, in endgame content, there is very little single target DPS that's pure single target. It's a lot of cleave damage or really high density of AoE. Like, if you look at AA, there's a lot of single target in there, like Storm Atra, the first boss, Foundation Atronach, Valerial. Most of that is single target. The ads are kind of like whatever. But in Mage, there's a lot of ads. There's the mini mages, there's Storm Atronachs, there's all that sorts of stuff, so that sorts of diminishes. Then we look at HRC, Rocco 2, mainly single target, but then we look at Yokeda Kai, there's a lot of ads that need to be taken care of, or the bottom boss. The Warrior has lots of ads, especially on hard mode. If we look at Sanctum Ophidia, we have single target on the Manticora, and sometimes the Serpent, depending on strat, but all the other bosses, Ozara and Stonebreaker, those are primarily AoE fights too, because there's just lots of ads that need to be killed, like Overchargers and stuff. And then in Halls of Fabrication, there is literally no pure single target fight. There is always going to be at least 1 or 2 ads, like the Fabrication Hunters, there's 2 targets to attack, or if you're doing the Killing the Sphere strategy. So War Maiden looks really juicy, but when you start doing actual content like dungeons and trials, it starts to really diminish because a lot of our damage comes from elemental stuff. Shooting Star or Elemental Rage will not get the bonus. Blockade of Fire, which is really strong in AoE, loses out because there's less things. If you're doing a lightning heavy attack build, that really loses out too. So don't be baited into thinking, oh, hey, look, he showed War Maiden is a parse, and it did just under Scathing Mage. It was like 700 less DPS. So that means it's good, right? It beat Julianos. But the issue is this is a pure single target fight, so it doesn't translate well into pure endgame. Like if I went and sat and did the super long target dummy parse where I have 6 targets, War Maiden would get shit on. Like it would lose to pretty much everything because almost all of our damage comes from in terms of AoE, fire damage. Like, the only things that would get benefit are Twisting Path and Sap Essence, if we're even using Sap Essence. But our ultimate, our blockade, lightning heavy attacks, Destro Clench, if we're using that, none of that would get magical effects. So it starts to really, really hinder in actuality of combat. The other thing that really stuck out is Elegance did really, really well. It was the best out of the BOE sets. It was, I believe, just under 32k, like 100 less DPS. Let's pull this open. Here's our Elegance parse. Look at 31,899, just under War Maiden. But the really strong thing about Elegance is, like, yeah, it has that single target effect with weaving damage, but it applies to light and heavy attacks, and if we use a lightning staff, Elegance becomes monstrous because every tick of our channel will get that 20% bonus, and that all of those ticks split to additional targets with our passives. So it becomes monstrous, like disgusting, where it actually beats any AoE in the game because it just has so much raw cleave potential from that channel attack. And it's really, really easy. So a lot of people haven't given Elegance like a proper testing, but we're seeing that it's really, really strong. And not only is it strong, but it's easy, so a lot of people can use it. So if you're in love with that heavy attack build, like you play a Dragon Knight with Molten Armaments, or a Sork with just focusing on heavy attacks and stuff, Elegance is really, really strong, and I'm excited to see it translate into an endgame situation in terms of trials where I have so many things on top of me. Now, again, it is niche. It's not something that I would wear the entire time. Like, in some fights where I can sit still, Scathing Mage is going to be even stronger. Like, if I'm fighting on AoE on, like, Rakat or something, and I have a bunch of ads sitting in my Twisting Path, Scathing Mage becomes even stronger. So, in terms of the Nightblade, Scathing Mage is almost always going to win because like 68% on a pure single target over a 10-minute duration. Let's just double check. 808 seconds. Active time was 789, I think, because that was the shooting star ticked like right as he got up, so it increased the duration, and our DPS went down just a smidge. But like 68% uptime over that long of a fight is nuts. So it was over 10 minutes of parsing, because over 600 seconds we had 780, so that's 13 minutes of a parse. That's monstrous. So yeah, like the fact that that was up that much in a single target fight, like if we were to have 3 additional ads, that would increase the proc rate of Scathing Mage and the uptime all the more, because for every target, you're increasing the chance by 20%. So if I have 3 targets, it's 20% times 20% times 20%. You add them all together, and it's like 30%. And that's just from Twisting Path alone. And then if we're using a lightning heavy attack, that procs Scathing Mage because from the final explosion. And then like Sap Essence, every hit of Sap can proc it. So Scathing Mage is going to be really, really strong and just go even further in endgame competition or endgame DPS. So like if we look in terms of actuality in combat, Scathing Mage is always going to be the best, unless it has a really low proc chance. So in like Halls of Fabrication, when there's tons of movement and bosses become immune to damage, like on the 3rd boss, or if you're in the top group on 2nd boss, then Scathing Mage is going to see a really low uptime because you're just moving around. You can't do constant damage. Stuff is moving. So you might want to use something like Elegance, where you're doing a lot of heavy attacks because there's so many Magicka drains. So Scathing Mage is situational, but ideally, like in Mauve Lorcage, definitely going to be best. In Sanctum, definitely going to be best. AA, going to be best. Like in all of these trials where you're kind of just sitting still sort of thing, Scathing Mage is going to be disgusting in terms of DPS potential. Easily coming ahead. War Maiden is not going to be good. It's going to be the worst in terms of actual combat, but in terms of like target dummy parsing, it's going to look really strong because it's single target. But if I were to add additional targets, it would fall down below TBS and Julianos. The other thing is that Twiceborn Star and Julianos are almost identical. We saw 31,364 from TBS and 31,479. So just a little bit over 100 extra DPS on Julianos. The thing is that in raids, Julianos is going to come ahead a little bit more because you have things like Aggressive Warhorn that add that 15% crit hit damage to what you already have. So since Julianos has a higher crit chance, like if we look, with Twiceborn Star, I only had a 62.2% average crit chance, but with Julianos, I had a 68.5% crit chance. So more crit hit damage from Aggressive Warhorn and stuff, that's going to be more powerful. But in terms of survivability, Twiceborn is going to come ahead. So if you're a newer player or you like to play it safe, Twiceborn Star are going to be really, really great for you. So like in Maelstrom Arena, Julianos comes ahead because Twiceborn Star requires you to crit. So if you're unlucky and you're trying to push that boss and get a new score, Twiceborn isn't going to be that good, because if you're not lucky enough to get it, then, oh, you have to try again, versus Julianos, where you're constantly getting that 299 spell damage. Talked about Elegance, really, really strong. Excited to see what it looks like in a raid environment. I'm really looking forward to it, and I have high hopes for the heavy attack build with Lightning. Going to be really good. War Maiden, confirm my thoughts. It surprised me that how well it did on single target, but I know why it did well, and it's because all of these magic damage amps. So, like, just seeing that, oh, Blockade of Fire went down from 12.6% of my DPS. It still did 12.6%, but other stuff started to fall down in the line. Like, my light attack damage went down 2% of what it used to be, 1% in other parses. Blockade of Fire went from 4K DPS, like 4,200 to 4K, so I lost 200 DPS there. Assassin's Will went up, Twisting Path went up. So like in single target, that all looks really, really nice, but as soon as we get into AoE, where I'm using Shooting Star more frequently because there's more adds to hit, or Destructive Rage, and then getting Soul Harvest hicks to give me more ultimate back, that's just going to go down even more. So War Maiden, again, it looks really good, but don't be baited into thinking, hey, this pure single target fight, it showed really, really good results. But remember, what fight in the game is pure single target? Unless you're trying to flex your EPing with the budget, tell your friends with a target dummy and say, hey, look how good this is. I don't have Scathing Mage, I could be so much better. Well, yeah, on a single target dummy fight, but what does that actually mean in the game when you have stuff hitting you in the face and there's actual things of combat to keep in mind, like, oh, I get more ulti-gen from additional targets with Shooting Star, but I'm not getting a modifier because it only affects magic damage. So just things to keep in mind. Hopefully this has helped if you're a Magicka Nightblade main to give you an idea, or we've talked a little bit about other classes and it's given you an idea and you don't have to wait anymore because you see firsthand how does this stuff work. In terms of translations, I guess, if you're not looking to wait for the other videos, Julianos is going to be good on everything. Twiceborn Star is going to be pretty good on everything. Julianos is going to lose a little bit more on other classes that don't have that built-in crit hit damage like the Templar or the Nightblade, because Julianos has more crit chance. So like on a DK or a Sork, you're probably going to see a more rise out of TBS versus Julianos because you don't have that innate crit hit damage passive. Elegance is going to be really strong on everything except a Templar, because Templars don't have a lot of weapon or light attack modifiers. Same with Warden, they don't really have a lot of amps there. Well, like DK and Sork, who has tons of amplifications to light and heavy attack damage, or the modifiers that they do, like Sork's increased lightning damage, DK's have increased flame and molten armaments. Then Elegance is going to be really strong for you. Scathing Mage, only really good on a Nightblade and a Templar if you're able to sustain it because you're using jabs, because every tick of jabs can proc Scathing Mage, or every tick of Burning Light, which comes from jabs, can proc. And there was another thing where the first hit of Reflective Light also procs Scathing Mage, and their Execute also procs it for whatever reason, even though it's a dot. So Scathing Mage is pretty strong on a Templar in terms of cleave damage. In pure single target, I might not wear it compared to TBS, or Julianos, although, again, in what fight in the world really is pure single target where I would warrant changing gear around, sort of thing. And then War Maiden is going to look really strong, pure single target on a Nightblade and a Templar, and then kind of shit on everything else. And then in actual combat, when you're doing lots of AoE and stuff, War Maiden is going to be really, really weak because it's not affecting your most important damage, like Wall of Fire, your ultimates, that sort of stuff. So again, hopefully this has helped give you an idea for Magicka Nightblades, what gear to be using. Thank you everyone who donated to make this possible. I had tons of people from trade guilds giving me advice, helping me find pieces. A big shout out to Random User, one of my patrons and friend who literally gave me entire sets of gold gear. He gave me War Maiden. He gave me a bunch of Elegance. Like, thank you so much. That really helped allow me to finish this video. So big shout out to him. And just everyone else for providing support, subscribers, patrons, whatever. You guys are fucking awesome. I would be nothing without you. So, yeah. Next is going to be the Dragonite video. We're going to investigate Julianos, Elegance, Voiceborn Star, Sun, Burning Spellweave, and I think that'll cover everything for them. But until then, I will see you guys around. If you've liked the content in this video, consider pledging at my Patreon. The community's interest and support ensure that I can keep making content as well as looking for ways to improve. To those who already have, I truly appreciate all the support, discussion, and encouragement you all give. You are amazing. If you have feedback for this video, drop a comment below, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or subscribe to the channel. Other than that, I will see you guys next time.